Hey, what is happening everyone? Welcome back to another video, and today we have ourselves a pretty special package from Natalie the Nerd. And that will be in the form of an internal port replacement mod that will allow us to use microSD cards directly from the external port without the use of these old dinky adapters. So let's take a look at what we have here. We've got the invoice, we've got the actual adapter, and a little sticker. So we've got a pretty straightforward label, PSP-Go microSD, some clean branding, which I really like, a QR that will link you to nataliethenerd.com/install guide, where you can find various guides for all the mods that are offered, including the microSD card slot. And how this works is you have to desolder the original one. Of course, you gotta wrap everything up, make sure that you do it safely. A hot air gun will be very useful. Carefully remove it, and it's most likely gonna disintegrate when you do it. Use some flux, remove all the pins, clean it up, and finally you can lay it on top, solder on the points, and it's pretty much good to go. Now here's the interesting part that I'm very excited about. You see, it says it's been tested up to 128 gigabytes. However, it says that bigger cards will slow down your PSP on startup, which we already found out in the storage maxing video, as the PSP likes to scan everything on the SD card before displaying anything. And the higher the storage, the slower things will be. So yeah, here it is in all its glory. Looks pretty clean. Hand soldered, by the way, from what I've seen on Twitter. There's nothing left to do but to go ahead and rip this thing apart, install this thing, and test it out. So let's get into it. Alright, so welcome to the new modding station. This is going to be where we go ahead and do all our future mods moving forward. You're going to be seeing it more often as we're finally done with the basic mods that don't really require any soldering. So we have all our soldering tools set up, and I'm pretty excited about it because I can finally work on something without getting the review table dirty and without having to reset up the overhead camera every time I want to do something over there. Now, if you've never soldered before, don't worry about it, as we'll have a dedicated video about it sometime in the future, where I give you a rundown of the basics, some tips and tricks, and most importantly, in my opinion, some proper good tools that are affordable. Now, although I don't have a PSP-Go disassembly video and reassembly video, we'll be roughly going over the basic steps to take it apart and put it back together. So on the back, you got 4 screws, as well as 2 extra ones on the top. And they're all Phillips head. The top should just pop right out like so. As for the back, it should just pop right out. So here's what you want to do. First off, remove any M2 card that you may have installed. Then you'll have 3 screws on the top, 2 screws on the bottom, 5 ribbon cables, and 1 battery connector right here. Typically the battery should just pop right out. This ribbon should just come right out. Carefully remove it. It doesn't have any clips. Pop out the bottom part. And now you have 2 more screws for the analog and the headphone jack, which should allow you to fold it over like so, pop the connector, and carefully pull it out. As for the headphone jack, you can just pull it out as there is no clip. And to remove this battery spacer, you want to pull it out at an angle like so, as it's got a metal piece that kind of sits into a little groove. One last ribbon right over here. And this one comes out without any clips. And what you want to do is to slide it open and pop the motherboard right out, fold it over, and remove the display connector. So we got to remove this part carefully and safely without damaging any of the other components that are nearby. And once we're done, this thing will sit at an angle where we will be soldering the various points all around it. And I'm just realizing this, but this might be one of the toughest mods for new beginners, as not everyone has a rework station. And I'm not saying that's impossible to do with a soldering iron. It just takes some experience, patience, and again, the right tools. Because you could easily rip the pads if you try to force something that isn't ready to go with the right amount of flux and heat. So to keep this in place, I'm going to be using this little plate right here. It's made out of metal, it's pretty heavy, and we got these little magnetic thingies that will allow us to clip in and secure the motherboard in place. Now to shield various components around the M2 slot that we don't want to damage or affect with the heat, I'm going to be using what most people use, which is Kapton tape that is heat resistive and specifically made for this type of stuff. The biggest things that I'm kind of worried about would have to be this little SMD right here, this other one right down here, and finally the LED indicator right over here. So these are the most sensitive parts out of everything here that's most likely to get damaged or slide off during the heating process with flux. So make sure you have those taped up real nicely before you move forward. Now, of course, you could definitely do this project without the use of a hot air gun. All you need is some patience, a good iron, and some flux. The biggest hurdle, in my opinion, would have to be removing this shield. Once you do remove this shield, it should be a pretty smooth process moving forward. There are a couple points around it that we need to loosen the solder on. Once we do that, this thing should pop right out, revealing the plastic underside alongside with the card reader pins. And those should be pretty easy once we get this shield off. So let me see how this goes. Alright, so that should be good enough. So I'll be using this chisel tip to get through the various anchor points for the shield here. Some good old flux, and I might as well use a pry tool here to try to pull at it while I'm heating it up. Okay, I think that one just popped. All right, that's 2 parts. Now for the next finicky part, which is right beside the little SMD, maybe I'll go at it at a different angle so I'm less likely to actually touch it. All right, that came up pretty easily. Damn, I'm off camera again. That's also removed. Now for the other side. All right, so the sides are done. Now we have these 2 corners, and I believe these 3 little contact points right at the back. I think the shield here goes under the plastic, through it, and then it threads through into these contact points. So we need to desolder these as well as we're prying it out, and this thing should just come right out. Time for some more flux, and possibly some more solder. I'm going to go for a different strategy, just melt the plastic. I think it's got enough strength that I could bend it and show you what's under here. So let's try and do that. Okay, so I think I ripped out 1 contact pad from the shield here. It's not a big deal, as it's not necessary for the actual function. So here's what we have left. We got a bunch of pins that is embedded between the plastic frame. Here's a tiny spring for the spring action, a little buddy. And the game plan here is to melt the plastic, pop it out, and then remove the individual pins, clean up the board, and we should be good to go for the soldering process. I guess this part can just break off, so we're just going to help it out here. All right, that's gone. Now we can remove the pins, and that should be a pretty easy process as long as you got a little bit of flux, which we definitely have. And I'm going to be using a pair of tweezers to help me pull these out piece by piece. And you want to be extra careful. You don't want to rip the pads. Just grab them until they're ready to go, and they should just pop right out. And don't do it like me. I'm doing like 2 piece by 2 piece. That's kind of risky because one may be ready to go, the other one might not. And I think that is almost it. So now let's go ahead, remove the tape, clean things up, and see if we damaged anything. All right, so at first glance, things do look good. The little SMDs I was worried about, they're in good shape, but the little LED indicator might have gotten a bit too much heat and it may have been damaged. It's all right, it's just an LED indicator of the memory card flashing. If it doesn't work, oh well. So now to clean this up, I'm gonna be using a copper wick. With the help of a flux, it's gonna wick up all the solder and allow us to clean the pads and all the excess solder in preparation for the install process. Again, what we're doing is going over all the little areas where the metal shield was connected, as well as where the little pins were connected. Final pass was just an iron, and I think we are ready to go. So this is what it looks like right now before we go ahead and clean it up with isopropyl alcohol. It's currently drenched with flux, but that's all right. We just gotta make sure that we fully clean it out before we close everything up, as flux left over like this on various components could eventually corrode the components and damage them, so we wanna make sure that we clean it thoroughly. A cotton swab can definitely be useful here. And by the way, what I'm using here is 99.9%, only the best. And of course, the flux is gonna go on the underside sometimes, so make sure you clean that as well, just in case. Let it dry before we move forward. And if anything here, I might suggest that you be careful of getting isopropyl on this little pad right here for the D-pad. I believe it's like a dampener, and sometimes this type of material can disintegrate when you have isopropyl on it. So I'd highly recommend that you don't get it soaked. All right, so now everything is cleaned up, we can finally go ahead and drop in the mod. Everything is lining up, so you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 contact points on the outside. And for the actual function part, we just gotta go over it with some flux and some solder, and it should be a pretty smooth process. So first, let's make sure that we have everything lined up, and the actual ribbon isn't warped too much, where it's kind of lifting off and giving you false visuals. But what's most important is that you have the actual memory card perfectly lined up. And give it a few dabs here and there. Gonna get my iron nice and hot. All right, so while I'm holding it in place, I'm just gonna go over the corners. All right, so this thing is not going anywhere. We can now finally go ahead and focus on the main contacts. And with a bit of flux and some good solder and a good hot iron, you just go over it like so, and you're pretty much done. That's it. And I think that's gonna be as good as it gets. Pretty clean, very nice fitment. Now let's see if I broke anything and how well it works. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean it up again with some isopropyl alcohol, put everything back together, and see where we end up. Yeah, I know, that's a lot of wasted isopropyl, but better be safe than sorry. A quick hit with the hairdryer. All right, to put everything back together, we're gonna go ahead open it up, connect the LCD connector, making sure that these two ribbons are on top of the motherboard, and the same goes for this one, and finally, this one right here. Then, before you clip everything in, you want to make extra sure that you have the power switch and the Wi-Fi switch arms lining up with the physical electric switch on the motherboard. Because if you clip it in without lining it up, you could possibly break the switch, and that's no fun. So close it up, line everything up, and then clip it into place. Next, let's put back on the triggers, as well as their respective retainers, and screw them into place with these short coarse screws. And note that these are actually slightly different from the ones that are on top. The ones on top, they have a flat face, while the ones for the triggers, they have a rounded top. The little metal here has to go into this little slot and then slit flat, and this will use the single smallest screw that has a fine thread. Now let's put back this first connector down here. It should just slide right in. Media buttons, triggers, clip into place, headphone jack, and the final ribbon cable being the analog stick. Now for these two down here, they use the only two black screws. Once that's done, we can pop in the bottom trim, and these will use two coarse, short silver screws. These are the same style as the ones that are on top. Finally, clip back in the battery, drop into place, put the cover back on, the top media bar, and use your tall screws for the back and your last two short ones on the top. And we are pretty much done. So let's go ahead and power it on and hope that we didn't break anything. And we're back. So fast forward a couple days, I got to test it out, get a good feel for it, test out the limits, and of course fix the LED indicator because it's pretty important. So first things first, you're probably asking, what's the maximum capacity? Well, the maximum capacity they could use without corruption is 128 gigabytes. Just like with the regular SD card adapters, as well as these little dingy adapters, that's pretty much all you're going to get. However, I did ask if there is a chance of getting something that can go beyond 120 gigabytes for all PSP models, and the response was, there might be a slight chance sometime in the future. Next question, are there any performance compromises when it comes to this adapter? Again, when compared to a regular adapter like this one. And the answer is thankfully no. In regular use case scenarios, everything functions as expected, speed test results are exactly the same, and yeah, there's no downside in terms of performance when compared to the standard stuff that you get on the market. Which brings us to the user experience. What's it like to actually use on a day-to-day basis? Well, a typical experience, at least for me, would have to be getting a high-capacity card, connecting it to a fast USB 3.0 card reader, transferring the bulk of my files, which are around 100 gigabytes, and then in the future, if I want to ever update my library, I just use the cable and just let it sit to copy whatever files I have. However, for the majority of users out there, they're probably just going to be plugging in a cable anyways and it doesn't matter. So that said, how's the actual user experience? Well, let's first talk about how you actually install it and get your memory card to recognize. First off, you want to actually go ahead and shut down your PSP. Then you open up the slot, slide in your memory card carefully, not to put it on top of the slot, but into the slot, and usually I do it at an angle like this, pointing it down. Once I get a feel for it, I kind of push it in, and that's pretty much it. And now when we go ahead and power it on, we can see everything has loaded in, alongside our folders, games, plugins, and all that good stuff. As for the removal process of your SD card, well, since we no longer have the spring-loaded action, the official method is to actually remove it with a pair of tweezers, just like so. And although we have the card right here, we can still see that we have some files showing up. But are they going to work? Well, here's what happens if we try to open a folder. First off, the PSP gets stuck trying to load everything, the memory card LED will be continually flashing, and all your controls are pretty much frozen until you either force shut it down or wait for it to time out. So let's force shut it down and show you what happens when you power on normally without a memory card installed. And what you're going to notice is that the LED indicator is constantly flashing, even though we don't have a memory card. So why is that? Well, that is because we have actually removed the spring-loaded mechanism, which is important as it actually functions as a switch that lets the PSP know if there's a memory card installed. And how I assume this adapter is working, it most likely has bridged the indicator signal in place of the spring-loaded mechanism. As a result, we encounter those two issues where if you go ahead and remove the memory card while it's loaded, the PSP is going to be lost and constantly trying to load it where it doesn't exist. And likewise, when you load the PSP without a memory card, it will also think that there's a memory card and is trying to flash and see what's going on. Which honestly isn't big of an issue, as you're most likely going to plug it in once or twice and leave it in. For $20, is it worth getting this mod and installing it? Well, if you're a PSP Go enthusiast and you're looking to absolutely max out your PSP Go with the coolest latest mods, well, this is going to be one of them. Although it has the exact same performance as these little adapters, it sure beats having to open up the entire back cover. Not to mention that sometimes the price point is very similar between these two adapters. They may or may not be similar in price when you put into consideration the shipping cost. And again, if you're a PSP Go enthusiast and you get the right tools and soldering experience, then this might be a no-brainer. So with that being said, would I buy it again for my other PSP Go? And for that, I would say most likely. However, I would definitely love to see a new revision where it would include a spring-loaded mechanism. It may or may not be possible, due to the space restraints, and that's probably why this type of slot was used, but who knows, maybe one day. So yeah, with that being said, that's all for this video. I'll leave a link for it in the description down below. Absolutely love what's going on here with the PSP Go, hope to see more mods like this. Compared to the Game Boy, we rarely get anything for this thing, and stuff like this in my opinion are a treat. Oh yeah, and one last thing, I thought I should mention it. I did order this as soon as it was posted on my Discord, and I pretty much got one of the first batches that were ever made, and on the first install it wasn't detecting my memory card. However, after taking a look at it with a microscope, I noticed that some of the pins on the actual slot were not fully soldered, and you can see them wiggle when you push them, and it was something that was definitely not noticeable with the naked eye. But it was a simple fix, a little bit of flux, one quick pass, and it was pretty much good to go. In my opinion, it's not that big of a deal. It is the first batch, and it was a super easy fix. It took me like 5 to 10 seconds to actually fix. Just a quick pass with a soldering iron, and it was pretty much good to go. Anyways, with that being said, that is all for this video. Hope you have enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Would love to see more mods like this. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.